welcome everybody. It's PSSC Theme Thursday, April 13th. And we are here. We are lucky here to have here Rich Gallego, who is going to be talking to us and showing us a few goodies. So welcome, Rich, and I'll let Margie introduce you if she hasn't already.
Well, I first met Rich, I think, at a West Valley Art Guild meeting. And yeah, and I've been following his Instagram and website a lot because I really love the way he composes his compositions, which is where we got, Maureen and I came up with that composing the landscape title for tonight's program. So anyhow, we want to welcome everybody and just a little promo here. Our meetings are free. They're a great way to introduce our members to painters, art historians, and sometimes we just get together and talk about what we're working on. So, Chris, do you have anything you'd like to add? I know you know Rich, right?
Yeah, actually, I have never met him.
Oh,
I'm glad to hear he's one of the Tehachapi fellows and is a friend of Lynn's. I'll probably see him up there coming up here.
You might have met him last year at Tehachapi, but maybe you didn't know who he was, but you were there, right? So
yeah.
Cool. And also I'm thinking if you want, Rich, we could spotlight you to make your screen larger for everyone.
that would be great.
Okay with that?
Whatever works for you guys.
Is everybody okay with that? Okay.
Yeah.
I think that might be good. I mean, you could pin him individually, but I think if you spotlight, it'll be good for the recording also and make his screen a little bit larger. So
okay. So where do we go to do that?
Go to, let's see, go to the right where all the participants are.
Yeah.
And then you can spotlight. Is that correct, Lupe?
Go to the square.
Oh, you can go to the square and click on
yeah,
the three dots. Okay.
Go to his square. Okay.
And click on the three dots. And I think
Yeah,
that's what it is. Right? Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Lupe.
Spotlight for everyone. Or no. Let's
Yes.
see.
Spotlight for everyone. That's
Okay.
good.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Yay. Thank you.
Oh, I feel bigger already.
Oh, that's great. Now we can see what's behind you as well. Okay.
So Rich, I was interested in how you decide your approach to looking at a scene and figuring out composition, what to do.
Yeah. So, you know, I think maybe different people are attracted to different things. For me, when I see shapes that I find interesting and that they work together in a way that I find interesting. In other words, it's not just static, you know, two rectangles and a square type of thing. I'm attracted to shapes, and of course, shapes are defined by values for the most part. So if I see a scene that intrigues me, I know that there's usually, there's some things that they have in common. There's usually one dominant shape, all right? And then once I see that, if there's a lighting effect that I like, then that's great too. Then I automatically start thinking about how to design it. Like, how am I going to lead the viewer through the scene? That sort of thing. I tend to be attracted to warm colors. So I've been, this is something I was not aware of myself, but over the years, people have commented to me and said, well, you seem to like orange a lot. And, I look at my paintings and I do like warm colors a lot, but also I live out in the high desert and I spend a good deal of time painting in the desert Southwest in New Mexico and Arizona and, that sort of thing. So it kind of goes with the territory. But yeah, usually I'm just looking for a scene where I can identify 4 to 7 major shapes that work well together. And by work well together, what I mean is they're not the same. There's not There are angles that are dissimilar. They're not the same shape. They're not the same size. And if I can find one dominant shape, either a dark against light or light against darks, then that's a pretty good place for me to start.
Another question I had for you is, how early did you take up painting? Has that always been your trade, so to speak, or pay the bills?
No, in fact, no, I had a almost 31-year career running an immunology lab at Children's Hospital, LA. And yeah, about 10 years into that is when I discovered painting. And I had a friend who worked at a sculpture fabrication place in Burbank, actually. And I started doing work with him on the weekends where we put together monumental sized sculptures that artists couldn't do in their own studios because it was too big, So they give you the specs and tell you what material they wanted made out of, and we'd build it there. And that got me interested in other forms of art. I started going to art shows that we'd be invited to, and decided to try my hand at it at one point. And I just took to it really quickly. I started drawing a lot, and after a while, I decided that this was something I could get serious about. So I started taking classes at Art Center in Pasadena, life drawing and that sort of thing. And after about a year and a half, I ran out of classes that I thought were going to help me there, because I wasn't interested in doing automotive design or packaging design or some of those other things, those disciplines that they teach there. I just wanted, by that time I discovered that I really wanted to do landscape painting, and they didn't do a lot of that at Art Center. So I just started off on my own, pretty lost for the most part, looking at Southwest Art Magazine, Art of the West, that kind of stuff, and then trying to figure out how people did things. And really one of the hardest things for me was getting my brain to function in a way that was different than it did in my lab, because in the lab, everything's very, very precise. I'm guessing that with the amount of people we have here tonight, there's somebody here with a medical background, and or an engineering background. You have to be very, very precise about these things, but that's not how I wanted to paint. So figuring that out was quite a big hurdle, but time, lots of practice, lots of study. Yeah, so I haven't been doing this all my life, but I have been doing it for the last 25 years or so.
So I know that you also teach private lessons, and
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you some of your favorite spots. Actually, when you found out where I live, you thought it was really far away. But actually, I looked it up, and it was just about an hour drive, which isn't bad. I've got a lot further than that to landscape paint with people.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Margie, I don't recall offhand. Where are you?
Oh, I live in Camarillo,
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Ventura County.
yeah. Yeah, I'm out in Palmdale. Been here for 22 years now.
Mhm.
A couple of reasons we moved out here. One was because I had just gotten married and we wanted to buy a house, and there was nothing in Glendale where I was living that was affordable and had any space to it. So we moved out here. But the other thing was I was not interested in painting anything in the Glendale, Pasadena area. It just, I like the wilderness, basically. So
Right.
moving out here got me closer to the Eastern Sierra. It got me into the desert. And the backside of the San Gabriel Mountains are stunning, especially in the fall. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Devil's Punch Bowl or Pallet Creek, Fenner Canyon. Those places, at the time when we came out here, I was still being represented by Siegel Fine Art in Monrovia. They've gone out of business. They sold the place and moved away. But at the time, I would bring paintings there, and Laura Siegel would say, well, this is very nice, but I don't think the people around here want paintings of, northern New Mexico. Not northern New Mexico, it's LA County, But we've got groves of sycamores and cottonwoods, and you've got the blue mountains with the snow caps in the background, and you'd never guess it was LA, So yeah, we moved out here, and it was a really good thing, because suddenly I had a whole bunch of subject matter to paint that was really exciting to me. And I kind of fell in love with it. So we're still here,
curious, do you ever do any kind of urban landscapes?
I do from time to time. If a lot of times there'll be an event that I'm doing where you kind of
Okay.
can't avoid it, you know.
Right.
And I don't. All right, so I didn't used to like doing them at all. I would tell people, no, I just like pristine landscapes. I don't want to do anything in a city or anything. And then I did the Wyoming Plein Air Invitational. And they had a rule. It was a 5-day event. And the first 2 days you had to paint in Cheyenne. And
Okay.
the reason was they wanted the locals to see all the painters out there and you know, drum up interest. Now, after those first 2 days, you could go anywhere in the state. But those first 2 days, you're in Cheyenne, and I'm looking around and I'm like, well, there's nothing that excites me here at all, but I got to do it. And so I started painting like some railroad tracks going behind some warehouses or something. And I realized the reason I didn't like painting structures and all that stuff, I wasn't any good at it. But that forced me to do it.
Right.
And so, you know, that was just a couple of days, but the light went on. And I said, oh, you got to learn how to do this better. Because, you know, when you've got structures and alleyways and streets, you know, perspective is a really big deal. If I'm just painting out in a field with a tree, it's, you know, there's still perspective issues, but it's not nearly as serious. So it was a good lesson. You know, I realized, oh, I gotta really sharpen up the skills on this. And so now I actually enjoy doing it. I do structures. It's not a problem. I don't like being in the city because I don't like being in the city.
Right.
I'd rather be out where there's open space, you know, and a lot of natural beauty. Yeah.
So I think that you mentioned that you enjoy reading the Western Art magazine, which I take, and there was another one you mentioned.
Yeah.
How about books? Do you have any favorite books that you go to ever?
For art's sake?
Yeah, for art.
Yeah. So there's the regular list of art books. You know, Richard Schmidt's Alla Prima is a wonderful book. Well, both of them are wonderful. John Carlson's Landscape Composition, I believe it is. That particular book, I've had students who I recommend it to, and some of them have a hard time with it because for those of you who have read it, you recognize sometimes the language in it is almost Middle English. You know, it's not. It's a little dated, right? And I guess that's a turnoff for some people. I have a real reverence for the English language, so it actually kind of excites me more, you know. I think it's a fantastic book. And Kevin McPherson's first couple of books were really instrumental too when I first got started painting. You know, what is it? Fill your landscapes with light and color, I think was the first one. So, you know, there's those, but these days I really don't like even the art magazines. I hardly look at art magazines anymore. What I do is I read things like, you know, I read books on philosophy and books on neuroscience and art, things that really challenge my brain, because my thinking is, if I can challenge my brain, I force it to be nimble and elasticize, if you will. And what happens then is I believe it makes me more open to possibilities. When I'm out in the landscape, I'll see something that I can see, well, that's a painting over there. I can make a good painting out of that. Whereas before I wouldn't have recognized that. So my thing is I'm trying to constantly challenge my brain. I'll read, you know, the thing I talked about people a lot is Immanuel Kant's treatise on beauty and aesthetic. And it really talks about the difference between, you know, aesthetic beauty versus practical beauty, something that's got a purpose, like, you know, a building, or something that's just exists for the sheer beauty of it. And, you know, the idea that you can't contain beauty within a frame. It depends on what the individual person is bringing to it, their own background, their own personal aesthetic. What is the importance of beauty in a person's life? I try to think about all of these things, as well as a lot of scientific principles, like how to use fractals in my art, how to use peak shifting, where I'm changing the aspect ratio of shapes to make them more interesting, asymmetrical rhythms, because all of these things have been proven to engage the human brain at a deeper level and for a longer amount of time. So if I can I can, use those concepts in my art. That might be the difference between somebody buying my piece or the one next to it.
Could you perhaps show us a piece where you use that idea of asymmetrical symmetry?
Yeah, well, actually, asymmetric rhythms, actually the one behind
Rhythm,
me.
sorry.
I don't know if this is close enough for you guys. Can you make that out?
I can make it out. How about the rest of you?
What I'm talking about is the idea where there's a specific amount of space between the edge of the painting and this first vertical here. And then there's another slightly different span here. But then there's three of these Joshua trees close together. So there's very small spaces between them. And then a still different space between this and the one way back here and this one in the edge. So they're not spaced equidistantly. And
Okay.
the thought behind that, whether it's a line of trees or bushes or rocks or a fence posts or whatever, the reason to do that is if they're all equidistantly spaced, if you think about music, there's common time, which is 4/4, right? And it's 4 beats per measure, and it kind of goes bum, 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 bum. And it's very accessible, but it's not terribly interesting. When you have an asymmetric rhythm, like what I was just pointing out, it's more like a syncopated rhythm, like you hear in jazz, right? So it's boom, bum, 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 that kind of thing. So there have been studies done at different universities. University of Chicago did a study where, they put probes on your brain and all this kind of stuff, and they actually can figure out that people stay more engaged for a deeper level of engagement for a longer period of time if things are a little bit less easy to access rather. And so you might lose some people, but the people that like it are really, really going to like it. And that's just one idea. Now you still have to know composition, you still have to know color theory, design, all that kind of stuff. But assuming all that stuff is understood, then you put something like this in. The research shows that it gets people's attention and holds it longer. And that's certainly something I want to do.
Rich, I have a question. This is Lynn. Do you
Sure.
ever put things like near the edge to create tension, or can you talk about some of the ways you push the margins as well? I love hearing you talk about this asymmetrical and fractals and everything, but what are some other things that you experiment with?
Yeah. So actually, I'm not a big fan of putting things right near the edge necessarily. Let me change this out real quickly because I've got kind of a diagram to show you that kind of relates to what you're talking about there. Yes, there's another one that I'm working on underneath it. So this is something that I use with my students. And the purpose of this, I'm just going to get out of the way so you can see it a little bit better for a minute. The deal here is, this is 4 different scenes, but it's actually the same elements, right? In every one of these 4 scenes, you have a foreground, a midground hill, a background mountain and sky, and then you have 3 tree masses. But they're all arranged differently. So to your point, Lynn, what I'll sometimes do is really, really raise the horizon line up high, sometimes to an uncomfortable degree. And just to see if I can get away with it. There's a lot of experimentation. Something like this was kind of more conventional. But I'll take the elements of a scene when I'm out in the landscape, and I'll say, well, what if I move this tree forward, and now it goes up higher than the ridge line of this midground hill, and I'll do the same with this one, but I'll move this one back so that it's a lot smaller. And so you can see I've moved all these elements around, made the mountain bigger, made the mountain farther back and smaller, made the midground hill come up. So I'll play around with all the different elements of the scene and try to find the one that excites me the most. And that's one of the things that I try and relay to my students, is that
Likes green.
when you're out there,
Was green. His hat is green. His shirt is green. He likes
Sorry?
green.
Can everybody please mute themselves unless you're asking a question? We're hearing some background. Thank you.
so I'll try to remind my students that when you're out in the landscape, you want to use all this stuff that you see out there as reference material. That the goal is not to paint a photographic reproduction of the scene. At least that's not my goal. And you know, nature doesn't always provide you with a perfect composition. So if I can take the elements that are at hand and enhance them and get a composition that I think is more interesting, and sometimes more interesting means creating more tension. Sometimes it means more angles that are a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I will experiment. And the thing about that is when you experiment, some of the experiments fail, and you got to be okay with doing that. You know, there are paintings that I've done where if I showed people, they'd look at them and go, "What's going on there?" You know, and what's going on there is a failed experiment. But I figure you got to do that. What's that?
I have a file for those.
But
But that
Well,
being
yeah.
said, I have actually gotten an award in a couple shows doing an odd mods, which is where you take, you know, I think for a lot of us that are intermediate and more experienced, there'll be one part of your painting that you go, God, I wish my whole painting had that kind of clarity or
yeah.
emotion to it. And so, you know, one of my friends, it could have been Otto, taught me the odd mod thing. And I just have a series, I live across from a framer. So he gives me a bunch of frames. And I just take them around and go, perfect.
Yeah.
And then, you know, trim it up to work that way. Now, when you showed your four scenes, the one with the lines going back right behind your head, I immediately thought of the lavender fields.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, with the rows and furrows and yeah,
You know,
yeah. I mean, there's a continuum that we all, you know, we start at the beginning, and then the more experience we get, we learn things along the way. And at some point, we're just trying to, you know, do something that looks like the scene, right?
mhm.
And then the point usually where we're trying to paint everything that we see just like we see it. And it's really what was it, Degas, that said painting is really easy when you don't know how, but it's really hard when you do.
Right.
And he's right, because the more you know, the more you realize, okay, I've got to do something that makes this uniquely, you know, me. And I've got to find a way to distill the essence of the scene, not just paint everything that's there. There's a huge difference between simple and simplistic, right? Simplistic means you didn't edit anything out, you just painted what you saw. Simple means you did edit out the extraneous, and you hopefully you end up with the essential. And if you can paint the essence of a place, you know, that's a success. But it's not easy to do. You know, you got to know what to take out. And I mean, I think if somebody could ask, you know, write down how many questions they have to ask themselves in the course of doing a painting, I think it would blow our minds how many decisions we make.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah. Like,
but you have to know what questions to ask, and then you got to figure out the answer to them, right?
I have another question along that line. What do you think is the most important decision you make in terms of creating emotion in your paintings? Is it composition? Is it color? Is it design? I mean, we all try to get emotion into our paintings, and that's something I think I struggle with the most. Is, do I decide that ahead of time? Is it the time of day, the mood? Anyway, I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
So one of the things that I'm exploring right now a lot is the effects of weather, you know, atmospheric effects. You know, look, today was a bright sunny day. I did that poppy painting that was up there, and you know, almost nobody doesn't like pretty, right? So that's fine. And I love doing those kind of paintings. I like it too, and frankly, they help pay the bills. But there are other pieces that they can show more drama. They can show more of a sense of an emotion. Maybe that emotion is a foreboding if you're doing like a stormy scene. I find that effects of weather do that a lot really well. But the other thing, Lynn, that I do so how do you tap into the emotion of a scene, right? When you show up and you're looking at it, how do you even know what your emotion is other than, wow, that's really pretty? One of the things that I've asked students to do in workshops from time to time is we'll get to a place and I'll say, okay, you guys all have a little sketchbook and a pencil, right? And they think they're going to draw thumbnails. And I'll say something like, okay, write me a poem about the scene. Now, after they freak out because they think I'm going to read their poem to everybody, which I'm not even going to read it myself. The point to that is, it's one thing to experience a scene visually, but to get to the emotion, you gotta think about it and ask yourself, what is it about this scene that excites me, and what is it making me feel? So by asking people to write a little poem about it, I'm hopeful that will shift their brain to more an intellectual mode, where they can tap into the emotions of what they're, that they're feeling when they look at the scene. And then I'll have them just keep it right there at their easel and keep referring to it. And remember, look, if you start to stray away from what that idea was, it's right there reminding you. So it's a tough thing to do. And honestly, again, there's this continuum, and you have to get to a certain level of proficiency with just the nuts and bolts of painting, the basics of composition and design and values and all that. It's really not until after you've kind of, for lack of a better word, mastered that, when you can start tapping into emotions. And the thing about emotions, one person will look at it and you might bring them to tears, and another person will look at it and go, I don't get it. So you can't please everybody, but that's the way that I try to approach it. Look for things that are a little bit unusual, and then try to figure out what is it that I'm feeling about it. Because if you can't identify what you're feeling verbally, it's a pretty long shot that you're going to be able to do it with paint.
Thank you. That's a good answer.
Going back to basics, when you go out with your students, do you have a basic palette? I mean, I throw everything in my car because I have a big car.
Yeah.
So I have a Jeep, so I just have extra paint in it.
Yeah.
But I would think in the desert you use a lot of cad orange, right? What are your go-to colors?
Actually, I use the same palette pretty much wherever I paint. Yeah, there would be times when I was teaching a workshop in Hawaii, and I'd get home, I'd be home for a day, and then I'd head to Taos to teach another workshop. And of course, the palette in the natural scenery there is completely different, right? And even though it takes my eyes a little bit of time to adjust to it, I use a very limited palette typically. Pretty much titanium white, chromatic black, which, if you're not familiar with chromatic black, it's a gambling color that's actually a mix of phthalocyanine ranide and quinacridone red. So you have a very dark transparent green and a dark transparent red. It's not a true black. And then cad lemon. I like cad lemon instead of cad yellow because it's a bit cooler. I can always warm it up if I need to, but I have a harder time cooling off cad yellow if I need to. And then ultramarine and cad red light. Now, if I'm painting the poppies, I do like to have a little cad orange with me because it's difficult to replicate the intensity of that color without it. But yeah, usually, every once in a while I'll have sort of a guest color, if you will, just because I'm curious about something. Like the other day I was using, I used a little bit of phthalo turquoise in my sky. I just wanted to see if it would, how much bright things. But I stick to a very limited palette because, I think people ought to learn how to mix color. And if I'm hiking someplace, I want to travel as light as I can. And a lot of times, if I'm off painting on my own, I might hike 2 or 3 miles to a place. So yeah,
How could you paint in Hawaii without that turquoise in your palette? I'm just asking.
Well, everything's relative, right? So meaning you can make it look brighter or more chromatic if what you put next to it is the proper color to do that. So
you can, but okay.
Well, no, are you going to get brighter colors if you use the turquoise? Yeah, you are. But you can still do a really nice painting. It'll just be maybe a little bit lower key chromatically.
Okay.
And to that point, one of the things that I like to do is, because a lot of students, they have trouble differentiating between value and chroma. And there are 2 schools of thought that I'm aware of. One is, well, if you paint it the right color, it's going to be the right value. Okay. That's not the way I learned. My education said get the value right first. Okay, and if you do that, you can almost use whatever color you want, and it'll still relate well. So one of the things that I'll sometimes do with students is I'll have them do a painting with what's known as a modified Zorn palette. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that, I would assume. Modified Zorn palette that I use is, instead of cad lemon, I'm using yellow ochre. Instead of ultramarine, I'm just using the chromatic black. And then cad red light and titanium white. So it's just the 3 colors in white. But they're so muted that you almost have to, it forces you to concentrate on value relationships, which is really the way I teach people. This is the paramount thing. You have to get the value relationships right. You know, you can make a lot of mistakes with temperature and color. If you get the value relationships right, it'll still read. But if you don't get the values right, no such luck. So using the modified Zorn palette really forces you to get value relationships right. And the paintings come out a little bit, you know, they're a bit dull looking perhaps, but some of them are still beautiful, you know, and it's good practice.
I have another question that's probably controversial, but I've been playing around a little bit with this AI. It's called Discord Midjourney. I don't know if you've ever played around with that.
Nope.
Just blow your mind. And I only did it because my son is really into it. He's a creative, and you can actually tell the artificial intelligence, like you were looking at the sketch behind you. You know, I want to put 3 trees in a landscape. I want a high horizon line. I want a mountain. I want this. I want that. And it will create something, and then you can modify it. But it's a way of just kind of exploring imagination and exploring possibilities, having the computer kind of take you to some outer limits. And I use it more as just an exercise in creativity than anything else.
Yeah, and quicker, I would imagine.
Yeah, and it's very fun. It's just fun. It's not something that I would use as a reference or anything else, but it's just to kind of like push the envelope of what are the possibilities. And some of them are very complicated. There's a couple of AI apps that you can look at. But anyway, I just didn't know if you'd played around with any of that or if anybody else had.
No, and honestly, and I'm going to date myself here as if the white whiskers hadn't already done that. I'm just not terribly, I understand why that would be interesting to play around with, but it just doesn't excite me. I'd rather, I prefer acoustic music to electronic.
Yeah.
I prefer pushing paint around to using an iPad. And this is kind of just to me, it's an extension of that. Like there's a series of paintings that I've been working on recently. There's a place not too far from me where I found this kind of an old abandoned farmhouse up on a hill, and there were some wildflowers growing in front of it. And it's all, you know, none of it's very well manicured. It's all kind of grown wild, right? Which is right up my alley. So I've done like 4, I don't know, 8x10 plein air pieces and a 16x20, different angles, different times a day. Now that's the kind of thing that you could do with this app that you're talking about, and do it really quickly, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I go out there and stand out in the landscape and do it. Because I like doing that. You know, I like being out there and doing it. But you know, I always tell people when they take my classes, I am not going to tell you the only way to do this. I'm going to tell you the way I do it. And hopefully you will find some use in it. But there are plenty of other approaches that are very viable. And it certainly isn't, you know, my place to say, oh, don't do it that way. That's wrong. I don't believe everything is subjective, but there are some things that try what you like. If you get excited using an app like that, and that gets you interested in thinking in art terms, by all means, go ahead and do it, you know.
It's also kind of scary that computers are taking over.
Well, I'm not going to get into all that, but I do have a bias against some of this, what do they call it, transhumanism. I'm not real high on that sort of thing, so I'm kind of staying out of that.
I invite anyone else that has a question to type it into the chat, and then we can ask. And Margie, I'm sure you have some other questions as well, but I just thought if anybody has questions you want to ask, just
I'd
ask or type them in.
I was going to ask Maureen to jump in. I saw her here.
Oh, okay, yeah, she's here, I think. Maureen?
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay, good.
What did you want to ask?
Well, I know that you had read his bio and you found him very interesting. I know that one of the things I read in your bio, which I thought was really great, was on the idea of rejection in a show. Something
Yeah.
I'm familiar with.
We're all familiar with that.
Right. The idea that every painting is a lesson.
Yeah.
And for me, I take those as lessons of, you know, finding out from close friends. Like if I ask Otto, he'll just say, Margie, do you have enough darks in your painting? I could just tape him and just play
Yeah.
it out.
Yeah.
But would you like to talk about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's something that you guys know who Clyde Aspivig is?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I'm not somebody who gets impressed by celebrities. Sorry, somebody's trying to call through. I'm just going to ignore it. I'm not somebody who gets impressed by celebrities like actors or athletes or any of that kind of thing. I enjoy their work, but I figure they're just people with better paying jobs than mine. But somebody like Clyde Aspivig comes up behind me when I'm out painting and you know, says something and I turn around and see him. Yeah, that kind of shakes me up a little bit because Clyde is somebody who I've tried to you know, emulate for a very long time. I love his work. I love his approach. So the idea of rejection, you know, he told me, look, if you're going to do this, you have to have thick skin because there's so many different, you know, everybody's got their own personal aesthetic, including judges for shows, right? And there's no way to please everybody. And then, of course, there's the idea that, you know, you might just get somebody in a day, you know, you put a piece into a show, you submit it, and it's got a lot of purple in it. The guy who's judging the show or the woman who's judging the show, they just had a fight with their spouse that morning and their spouse's favorite color is purple. Well, you might be out of luck, right? And it's got nothing to do with the quality of your work. So yeah, I just try not to get too caught up in that. And then, you know, when I've won awards, I recognize that it's true there too. You know, there are a lot of good paintings that could have won. And I was fortunate that mine got picked. Now, that's not to say that you don't have to have a certain level of quality that gets noticed. Of course there's that, but there's a lot of people who can paint really well. So I just try not to get too caught up in that. And if I get rejected for something, I just go, okay, fine. What now? Here's the key is, and you guys, you know all this stuff probably already. When something doesn't go well, you can say, okay, I'm all right with it and move on. It's better if you try and analyze it and find out, you know, or try to figure out what is it that didn't work, because then you can improve it, right? And as long as you do that, it's all just a lesson, you know. And I know that people who start painting, whether it's plein air or studio, or you know, whether it's figurative or still life, doesn't matter. Again, there's this continuum, this learning phase, and at a certain point, you start getting pretty proud of what you're doing. And if you get too proud of it and you treat it too preciously, it'll stop your growth, right? I was talking earlier about experiments. One of my favorite painters is a guy named Len Schmiel, and Len does phenomenal work. Well, every once in a while, I'll see something that he does and I'll kind of look at it like, what the heck was he thinking here? But the thing about Len is he experiments. And like I said earlier, not every experiment works, you know? And I respect people who do that, because I think if you don't push that envelope, if you don't keep challenging yourself and challenging the preconceived ideas of what beauty is, you're going to get stagnant. You're going to get to a place where you can make pretty good paintings of the same kind of stuff, and then you're going to do that for 20 or 30 years. And if that's satisfactory to you, then that's fine. I have some fairly lofty goals. So, you know, I'd like at some point to be known as a historically relevant painter. And that may not come, if it comes at all, it might not come till well after I'm gone. But I figure if I'm aiming for that, it'll lift me up higher than I otherwise would be lifted. And in the meantime, it's a heck of a lot of fun, you know. And I don't get obsessed about ruining a painting. You got to be willing to ruin some of the best stuff you've ever done if you're going to keep growing. So I just look at every time I go out to paint as I'm practicing my observational skills. I'm practicing color mixing. I'm practicing laying down paint. And that's it. And if it turns out really nice, great. You kind of have to not care a little bit. You got to care enough to not care, if that makes sense. Because if you get too obsessed, oh, I don't want to ruin it, that's not going to work.
Can we circle back to Clyde Asymmetric for a second and his paint application and as you relate to it? You know, in the bottom of his foreground, sometimes they get really crispy. It gets really thick application, like the foreground. Yeah. Is that something you do? I mean, he also tends to leave his transparencies, his dark colors quite thin.
Yeah.
Is that something you do and you teach the actual methodology? Yeah. Can you walk through that a little on your particular style?
Yeah, it is something that I do pretty much just kind of by habit these days. But the reason for it, so if something's closer to you and you look at it, the moment you look at it, it becomes your focal point. And you're going to see it in crisp definition and everything, right? But if you're looking at a scene and there's something close to you that isn't the focal area, you want to, so you have to kind of convey to the viewer that thing is closer as far as the spatial depth is, right? But if
freezing. You can put the TV if you want.
Michelle, can you mute, please?
Oh, you heard a French accent.
But so you want it to look like it's close to you, but you don't want it to be so well defined that it gets people's attention, because really they're looking past that thing that's close. So I do like using a lot of thick paint in the light areas, but if it's in the foreground, extreme foreground, I try not to put a whole lot of definition into it. The thick paint lets you know that it's there. The lack of definition lets the eye move past it. Does that make sense?
But I mean, in the last two let's see, 4 master shows ago, I mean, Clyde's foreground was so thick and so crispy, and yeah. I couldn't get past those weeds or whatever it was. I mean, it was like they were almost 3D. And I thought, yeah. Obviously by intent, but I didn't know, obviously, he's the best. But he doesn't do it with his snow scenes. But sometimes with his landscapes, they get so crispy. I mean, beyond like Dan Pinkham's stucco crispy, it was like they were actually coming towards you, sticky. Yeah. You know, I was wondering about the intent, and do you employ that technique, or are you more?
Well, it almost depends on the scene, but in a general sense, yeah, I do. Like I said, I like to pile up the paint in the light areas, especially close up. But I will deliberately try to soften edges so that it doesn't get the eye stuck there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's pretty much the way I handle it. One of the things I like about Clyde's work, and I try to get a lot of I like variety in all things, including the paint surface. So, if it's light, I'll use really, really thick paint. And sometimes, in fact, I'm kind of, the people that paint with me kind of sometimes look at my palette and they're like, do you ever clean that? Because I'll have little bits of paint, little chewing gum sized bits of paint that have been there for 3 months, and they're dry. And, I might take a palette knife and get some wet paint and just stick it on there, it's texture, and I've seen that with Clyde as well. There sometimes will be a big blob of paint. You're like, what the heck is that even doing there? Mm-hmm. But I think it's just, he talks about painting symbols for things, not painting things, right? And so sometimes that symbol is just, what is it? I don't know what it is, but it's texture and it adds to the overall effect. And some people will look at it and go, wow, that's brilliant. And other people will say, what is that? It looks like you dropped some chewing gum in it. Mm-hmm. You got to go with what pleases you, because the rest of the world is kind of a moving target,
Well, I think it might be nice if our board members who are in charge of, we do general meeting paint-ins, mm-hmm. where, and we're down this wonderful facility in Redondo Beach, and the other thing is we sometimes meet for a group paint out. So would you consider doing that with us? And that would be something we would, of course, pay for. You get some
Going,
renew-
going out and painting with other artists. Yeah.
Absolutely, right?
What else would I like to do? You know, that's,
And also, Rich, what about pastel? I don't know if you've dabbled in pastel. It's very similar to oil, which is why this is super interesting,
Yeah.
because a lot of oil painters and pastel painters, you know, kind of switch back and forth between the
Yeah.
two. Have you done any pastel or?
I have, but it's been quite a while. Yeah, the only other medium that I paint in regularly, like occasionally I'll do an acrylic. Somebody asked, like there was another group that asked me to do a demo in acrylic, so I did it, you know, but it's not my favorite. I paint in gouache quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
I really enjoy painting in gouache, especially smaller pieces. You know, sometimes I'll do those if I don't have a whole lot of time. I can do gouache studies really quickly, and those sometimes translate into studio pieces that are larger oil paintings. But my pastel experience it's very limited. I think the last decent thing I did was, you know, I did a copy of a Howard Turpinning figure from one of his big paintings in pastel, but it's just not. I have a lot of respect for you guys for being able to do it, but
It's messy, right?
it's messy, man.
Although
It
we are
is.
doing, like, I've been doing a lot of gouache underpaintings, and I've
Mhm.
always done watercolor underpaintings, and I've done acrylic and even some oil stain underpaintings. So it's kind of fun, you know, to be able to paint and then use the pastel
Yeah.
kind of in finishing, and it makes it, I think, more painterly sometimes when you do that, or you do an alcohol wash underneath.
Yeah, it can. I have done a few things where I've done gouache on a fairly rough surfaced illustration board type thing, so it's got some tooth.
Yeah.
The point of that being so that I can go back over it for highlights and use a soft pastel.
Yeah.
I haven't done a lot of it. And you know, when Margie asked me to do this meeting with you guys, I had to say, well, realize that's not my area of expertise here. I don't want to misrepresent, but
Yeah.
but I do think that there is enough information that you know transcends media, that you know, whether you're talking to watercolorists or oil painters or whatever, composition, design, color, edges, all this stuff, it's universal. So I always find it, you know, useful if I'm here. I'll listen to a, you know, pastel expert talk. I'm always fascinated by it. It's just not the medium that I've chosen.
Yeah.
You know, and Otto's work, you know, I don't know where that guy's from. And by where, I mean what planet, because
Planet, I know. Yeah, he's amazing. I think he started by airbrushing t-shirts on the street
really?
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw
Yeah,
some
I
of
mean,
it
from
in Italy. Yeah.
the first time I saw his work from a viewing distance, I didn't even think it was pastel. I'm like, well, that's an oil painting, right?
It's pretty amazing, huh?
But yeah.
Well, you know, it's funny, in the Tehachapi brochure, they put my pastel as an oil painting. If you read last year's brochure, and I'm like,
Yeah.
But it's true. Sometimes it does look like oil.
Well, did they get your name right?
They got my name right. That's
Okay,
good.
well,
And that's okay. I was kind of flattered
That's
that they said it was an oil painting. That was cool.
yeah.
Does anybody else have questions? You want to just unmute and speak up, right?
Rich,
Please.
I got a question. Earlier,
Sure.
you mentioned a couple of places in the San Bernardino Mountains, Devil's Punch Bowl and maybe Pallet Canyon, but was that right? And was there a third one you said?
It was Devil's Punch Bowl, Pallet Creek,
Oh, Pellet Creek. Okay.
and Fenner Canyon, and they're all right in the same area. Devil's Punch Bowl, if you take Pear Blossom Highway off the 14, and you go up to Devil's Punch Bowl, you just follow the signs. You go up through, I think it's Longview Road that goes up there. And unfortunately, the Bobcat fire did a real number on that area. So there's not a whole lot worth painting there right now. But below that, as you're on your way up to there, you'll go past an area called Pallet Creek. And whoever named it wasn't an artist, because they spelled it with the wrong kind of palette. But in the fall, there's all these cottonwoods that line the creek. And the creek itself is pretty, but the cottonwoods just they're just gorgeous. I mean, they get this golden glow to them everywhere, and then you've got the mountains behind them, and there's also fields of sage in front. So it's, I mean, it's crazy beautiful there. And if you look, well, if you go past Pallet Creek heading east, you go through a little, it's not even a town, it's an area called Valiermo, and it's really just a bunch of ranches, and there's a post office. But eventually you'll get to Fenner Canyon, and you'll know it because you get to a place called Big Rock Creek. Big Rock Creek is it's really pretty. Unfortunately, there are people who go there and leave their picnic supplies and stuff, so they're always having to clean it up. That's really unfortunate. But the creek itself is really pretty, and if you keep going back into the canyon, you get to this transitional zone between the high desert and the pine trees, the alpine landscape. And it's very interesting, and it's very pretty at the right time of year. So I spent a lot of time painting in there.
Cool. Thanks for the tip.
Yeah, sure. Happy to tell you. Then out here, of course, where I am, the Poppy Reserve is probably about 20 minutes away from me. Leona Valley, same thing. Yeah, there's just a lot, to paint here. And in 3 hours, I can be in the Eastern Sierra painting ridiculously beautiful stuff. So pretty happy here.
Awesome. Are you a camper? Do you go out camping and paint?
Yeah. So the way I got started plein air painting was that, I was trying to figure it out in my, spare bedroom at home. It wasn't even really a studio, and my wife, we just got married, or just before we got married, actually, she says to me one day, if you like painting the landscape, you should do like those people that go out and do it out on location. And I thought, well, what people are those? I have no idea what she's talking about. Well, this is 22 years ago, 23 years ago. And I said, oh yeah, that'd be fun. She said, because you like backpacking and camping, and which is true. And I didn't give it much more thought. And then a couple of weeks later, it was my birthday, and she gives me a French easel.
Oh, how nice.
And I thought, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Now I got to go outside.
I just wanted you out the house.
That might have been it.
Yeah.
But I did. I took it out to Malibu Creek State Park. I was still working at Children's Hospital at the time. I took a day off, a Wednesday, and I drove out to Malibu Creek State Park and set it up right off the main parking lot. And there's a hill there with a big old rusty water tower on it, and there's oak trees on the hillside. And I thought, well, I'll try to paint that, right? And I did an atrocious painting. It was awful. But about 15 minutes into it, I just was overcome with this feeling of, this is the best thing ever. I love this. And I literally was hooked that day and never looked back. I mean, it's been an obsession ever since then.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Hey,
Yeah.
Do you paint many, have you painted many snow scenes?
Every time I get the chance. Yeah. One of the nice things about where I live is that every winter we'll get a few days where we get snow here, where I live. It'll in our yard, whatever. But even if it doesn't reach the valley floor, like I said, the backside of the San Gabriels are literally across the street from me. It starts moving up into the hills. And so we'll get snow there. We'll get snow out in Leona Valley. Tehachapi is not terribly far from me. So yeah, anytime I get a chance, I'd like to go out and paint the snow. It's a whole different kind of beautiful. So
Yeah.
We don't get snow here in Southern California, but how do you reconcile that with Nelson's book of landscape? And the sky's value number one, and the snow's going to be, unless it's in shade, so much lighter. Does it balance between your values? Is it something you have to learn your values, relearn your values? Because here we're always sky, ground plane, slanted plane, upright. But how do you reconcile that with snow?
So if you're thinking about like John Carlson's, sky's the source of light, flat-lying planes are the second lightest because they're reflecting it most directly. Then you've got the diagonal planes that are the third lightest, and then verticals are the darkest, right? And that's a good rule of thumb that's usually true, but snow is so innately light and highly reflective that it's, unless you've got a cloudy day, stormy sky with snow, if you've got a blue sky, the snow is going to be lighter. So just knowing that there are exceptions to the rules, and again, I preach to my students all the time, value relationships. And that doesn't mean look at a thing and decide what value it is. It means look at a thing and compare it to the thing next to it. and figure out what that relationship is. And it doesn't matter if you paint it in a high key or a low key, but the value separation has to be accurate, right?
Is
If
that
it's a,
harder to do with snow?
I haven't found that to be the case.
Okay.
But there are there are a few things that are supposed to be really difficult that I just somehow have avoided. You know, people talk about greens being very difficult.
They are.
Right? I got to tell you, I know that's the case because I've heard it from a lot of people. I don't get it. It's a color, it's got a value, it's got an intensity of hue, it's got a temperature. I figure those things out and it works.
Okay. I'm
Well,
gonna
I
do-
think-
Sense.
I
That
think
makes a lot of
I'm-
sense.
I'm sorry. I think that's one reason that doing those Richard Schmidt color studies really helped me. That really strengthened my paint mixing ability and my seeing the colors next to each other.
Yeah. Excuse me just a moment. I just want to show you
Sure.
something. So to that point, and it's got a little splatter on it because it's behind my studio easel here, but anytime I get another color that I haven't used,
Nice.
right? So somebody gave me a tube of chromium oxide green that I had never used. So the first thing I do is this. I got to do color charts to see what happens when I mix it with this or mix it with that, and how do I get the more intense chroma but a lighter value. And once I do that, I have a better idea, a better understanding of it. And that's one of the things that's so hard. Well, there's two things that I have trouble getting students to do. Actually, it's three. One is the color charts. Seems nobody wants to do the color charts, and I get it. It can be tedious, or at least it seems like it would be, but I start doing them and it's kind of fun. I actually enjoy it. So there's that. The other thing is getting people to draw enough, right? I've actually had students, when I tell them you got to draw more, and they'll say, well, you don't draw. Well, no, not in front of you. I'm teaching a painting class, but I draw all the time. You have to. And then the other is, and this is a big one to me, a lot of times people wait till they're well down the road in this whole journey before they actually learn what their brushes are capable of, right? So I'll tell people, get a piece of cardboard, something you don't care about, and then get the brushes that you typically use. And I only use, sometimes I'll use two brushes on a whole 18 by 24. I don't use a lot of brushes for a painting, because the thing is they're very versatile. They can do a lot of different things, and if you practice making all the different marks that the brush can make, you realize, I don't have to have this whole thing with 27 brushes in it, but it's hard to get people to do that. So just make different marks on a cardboard, see how versatile that thing is. Figure out, what happens if you do this, what happens if you do it. And that goes to another thing, which is learning how to load the brush properly, which again, a lot of people, they don't do it right. They'll take the brush, they got their puddle of paint, and they'll just kind of push it in and scoop it like this. And most of that paint gets pushed in between the bristles where it's never going to see the canvas. But if you lay the brush down at a low angle, move it back and forth while you're advancing it through your paint puddle, you're going to get a bead of paint right at the tips of the bristles where you can use it. And it keeps your brushes in better condition as well. So there's all these things that people can do to practice, but typically what they want to do is, I just want to go paint. Okay.
That's a really great tip about the brush. Laying
Yeah,
the
it
brush.
works.
And what are your two brushes?
I'm sorry?
What are your two brushes you claim to only use?
Well, sometimes I only use two. But when I go out to plainer paint, I've got a little, telescoping tube that I carry 5 brushes in. I almost never use more than 2. And it'll be a number 6 long flat, bristle brush, Rosemary and Company. And then very, very late in the painting, I'll go to a number 2.
Ivories? Ivory, rosemary ivories?
Yes. Yeah, I think the ivories, those are the ones, I believe I get the names mixed up. That's the one with it's boar bristle and with some synthetic fibers as well.
That's
Or is that
thought
the
the
classic?
record was all synthetic, but I'll look it up.
All right, it might be the classic that I'm thinking about, but
Okay.
I always have to look at their website to make sure I get the right one. But yeah, the thing is, if you pick up the paint right, the paint doesn't get down into the ferrule and splay the bristles, and it lasts a lot longer. You keep a nice sharp edge, and the brush is capable of doing a lot of things. So if I were going to do what you guys do, I'd probably have to find a brush handle that could accommodate a pastel stick in the end of it.
Otto actually has one of those.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
He made it himself.
He might want to market it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anybody else got anything?
Well,
Rich, do you have anything else you want to add about composing, since the title of this was composing a landscape painting? Do you have anything else you want to talk about on that subject?
Yeah, well, again, I think graphic impact is a really important thing, because say you've got a painting in a museum or in a gallery, and people are coming in to see, there's other stuff on the walls. If you want to grab people's attention from across the room, you need something that gives it graphic impact. And that's why, I advocate using 4 to 7 shapes that work well together, and one of them being dominant, because that tends to give me the graphic impact that I'm looking for. And the reason I say 4 to 7, that's kind of a rule of thumb. You can always, figure out, well, maybe this one's got 8 shapes or whatever. But and when I should probably show you something as far as what I mean by that. So take this. This is a gouache piece. It's in a plastic sleeve right now, but this is from Canyon de Chelly. So when I first started painting this, I'm looking at the sky as one shape. This darker rock in shadow over here is a second shape. This big one here is a third. Ground plane is a fourth, and then this darker tree over here is a fifth. So basically, there's 5 shapes right there. Okay.
Right.
And if you really wanted to, okay, there's a little darker one here, 6. So the reason I do that is because my idea is when I get fewer shapes than 4, it tends to get a little bit boring. And if I get more than 7, it starts getting a little bit frenetic. It's a little too busy. Okay. And that's just what I found in my experience. My goal is, once I arrange those shapes, and actually, let me show you another thing. You guys are familiar with no 10s?
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So this is from a local canyon down there, not Placerita Canyon. I forget the name of it. It's the next one down. But basically, it's this scene, right? But it starts this way, because when you squint and all you see is light and shadow, I want to see, is this interesting enough, or is it too symmetrical? Is it not interesting to me? But if I can do this and find shapes that are interesting, meaning they're not too much the same, this light shape and this light shape are very different sizes, different shapes. This is an irregular shape. So that tells me right away, there's some potential there. So my goal is, first figure that out, then figure out the individual shapes. And then from there, when I have them blocked in, my goal is to keep adding information to each of those shapes until it starts looking like what it's supposed to be and what I want it to look like. But at the end of the painting, I should still be able to identify all those shapes. So I can still see this sky shape. I can still see the shape of this hill and the 2 trees. I can still see the background mountains. I can still see the shadow cast on the trail and this lighter brush here, even though I added more information so that, clearly this looks more like a finished painting than this. But the initial structure is still there. Now, what sometimes happens is you'll say, well, I'm going to put a little bit of light on this tree, and they go, oh, that's pretty, and put a little bit more light and a little bit more. Next thing you know, that dark has been dissolved. And I see it happening all the time. When I see my students paint, and they make that mistake frequently. But if I can get those 4 to 7 shapes that I think are working interestingly in an abstract way, like the notan, and then I can identify the individual objects and then add more information such that I get to a completed painting and I can still identify the underlying structure, that's a good thing. So Barbara is asking, what's a notan? Notan is a Japanese term, and basically what it does is you look at a scene or a photograph or whatever, and based on the value of the different shapes, you assign everything to either a light shape or a dark shape. So this, which is a lot of, this is a little bit lighter than this, and this is a little darker than this, but if you assign them either to light or dark, this is all dark, this and this are light, and that's why this looks the way it does up here. So a notan allows you to look at the abstract shape and figure out if it's interesting. If I did a notan and this was a rectangle that went all across here, and this was another rectangle up here, it's too static and it's boring, so I wouldn't bother painting that scene. That makes sense? I hope.
But don't,
Also,
well,
there's-
don't most notans have it like maybe 4 values to, or white mid?
Well, you're going into a grayscale thing there, and you can do that as well. But my understanding of notans is it simplifies them as much as it can possibly be simplified, which is a light and a dark.
Okay.
So, yeah, were we going to ask something, Margie?
Oh, hold on. I was just gonna say that you can actually, there's an application that I have on my phone and my iPad that shows you notan in about simple, like you started with, that shape,
Mhm.
and then it'll go up 5 different levels. And if you want to emphasize the lights, you can put it on a setting to, show the glow, or if you want to emphasize dark and moody. And I try to do my paintings without using it, but then you can upload your painting and it'll show you what your painting looks like. And then I'll go, oh, I want more drama in this. So then I can shift it to the dark setting.
Yeah.
Or it's a bright sunny day and I'm not showing that. And it's just a fabulous check. And actually, the more you do use it as a checkpoint, and then you'll find you're using it less.
Mm-hmm. Is this, what's the name of the app?
It's, I can look it up for everybody. It's actually called Notan.
Oh, okay. So my friend Lori, her husband Mark is a computer programmer, and several years ago they came up with an app called the Value Viewer. You familiar with that?
This one's called Notanizer.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one, but it sounds like it does some of the same things. And I was very happy for Lori. She made a little money on it, hopefully. But by the time it came out, I looked at what it did, and you could take a picture of a scene and it would assign the right values, so you could figure out, make sure you had the values right as you were painting. I kind of thought, well, I already learned to do this, so I'm just going to do it the way I do it. But, to your point, those kind of things can provide really good checks. If something's not working in a painting, more often than not, there's a value issue.
Right.
And so if you've got something like that you can say, okay, this is telling me that, this rock over here is not quite dark enough, or the ground plane isn't quite light enough. There's always that conversation that goes on about, how much technology you should use. And people will say, well, the Renaissance folks, they used the camera obscura. So that was the technology of the day, right? So why can't we use the technology we have? We can. You can.
Exactly.
Here.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like I said, Lori, you guys know who Lori Putnam is?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. And when she came out with this thing, and she and her husband, you know, she showed it to me, and I'm like, well, great. Where was this thing 15 years ago? You know, I already figured out how to do it. But yeah, it's a great way to check. You know, if your values aren't accurate, if your relationships are off. So yeah, you know, use whatever you got to use. It's like the plein air competitions. I'll go to a competition, and that's one thing. If it's a competition, you're supposed to do it a certain way. But most of us are just trying to make good paintings.
Right.
I'll use anything I can to make a good painting. I don't see that there's anything wrong with that.
Do you agree that the only thing that really matters is the end result, what you're looking at? Doesn't really matter how you got there, right?
I will agree with that in terms of, you know, whether it's a good painting or, you know, show worthy or anything like that. The producing of it, the journey of it, the value of going out and doing it is the thing that I really love. So I wouldn't say that doesn't matter, but I get your point. And yeah, I think as long as you come up with a result that you're happy with, you know, doesn't bother me how you did it.
Thank you.
Well, you know, you're always going to have people that are, I don't know, they call themselves purists or whatever, and that, you know, whatever, that's fine. I'm just trying to make a good painting, you know, a good picture.
Can we circle back to Lynn's original question about emotion and the almost the separation from narrative to drama to like that, the beautiful painting behind your right shoulder. So it's like a house and a path and mountains and a tree right there.
Back here?
Yes, to me, it's telling a story. Like you don't need to tell me the story, but sometimes I don't know what I'm even trying to say. So can you walk me through how you get to that story? Because I got the narrative of that painting. I'm less.
Yeah, that's the key word right there. It's narrative. So I think, you know, there are some scenes that are more obvious. You know, the one I was telling you about earlier, where I've got this old broken down farmhouse, you know, with wildflowers in front and everything's kind of unkempt looking. And, you know, the narrative of that is, you know, this was somebody's home once, but it's not anymore. And you can ascribe a whole lot of different narratives to it, really. But there are some that are more obvious than others. And really, you just have to figure out, when you see a scene, what is it about this scene that intrigues me?
Right.
What is it about it that got my attention? And if you can figure that out, then you can steer it in a certain way, right? If it's and that's why I was saying I was experimenting with effects of weather and things like that. In fact, you know what? If you guys will let me, I'm going to show you something that I haven't shown anybody else yet, because it's kind of an experimental piece, and it's about the same thing. So give me just a moment here. There are times when people do paintings that you kind of look at them and you go, what the heck are they thinking? And this might engender that kind of reaction.
Oh, interesting clouds.
So this was a real scene, okay? And it's called, the working title is Downpour.
Oh.
Now, I'm looking at that while I'm painting it, and I'm thinking, to me, it was an extremely dramatic scene. You know, the amount of water that was coming down and the light on this cloud, it was intense. And the intensity of the weather, maybe that's the narrative, but there are going to be people that look at that and say, well, it looks like a Portuguese man of war, or it looks like an alien spaceship, or I don't know, right? I have no idea how well it's going to be received. But there was something about that scene that I was so impressed with, I wanted to capture it in paint. And whether it's a success or not, I kind of leave to other people to decide. You know, I like it. I like to paint.
It almost seems religious.
What's that?
It almost seems religious, like, you know, worshiping nature, or, you know, something, you know, it's so majestic.
Well, I mean, I hope that people see something positive in it. You know, what is art? You know, for me, art has to be something, and I'm not I'm not saying that I'm the person that makes the decision on this. We all have to decide for ourselves, but I personally think art should be something that inspires and uplifts. And that's what I aim for anyway. And that, to me, that scene was really inspiring. That's a reminder to me that, you know, and I'm not going to preach to anybody, but I believe in God, and that's a God thing right there, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
So if somebody sees that and it connects with them, that's great. Do I think there are going to be people that look at that and just go, what the heck? Yeah. Can't please everybody, right? So, you know, as far as the narrative or the mood, you know, you hear people talk about, well, your focal point should be here, or it should be here, or it should be this thing. And there's a hierarchy of things that people see as focal points. You know, if there's a human in there, if there's an animal, if there's a man-made structure, then there's lower things on the hierarchy, like areas of high chroma or high contrast. You know, we know that stuff. What if the focal point is texture?
Mhm.
Like, think about it. Maybe do an experiment. See if you can do something where the focal point is texture. There's a lot of different ways to look at things. All the stuff that we learn from the art books, it's almost like that's a starting point. That's a jumping off point.
Right.
And if you want to do something profound, you really got to, you know, wrestle with it and try and find something, you know, say something that's not been said before, or in a way that hasn't been said. And that's a much heavier lift, you know?
Yes.
Mhm.
So
Wow.
I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of went off on a tangent there. Sorry.
No, you did. Thank you.
Okay, good. Good. Yeah, so when people ask me things like, well, like when you asked me earlier, what books do I read? And I know you mean the art books, and I read art books, but once you get through all those, you know, I read philosophy, I read books about neuroscience and art, because there's some fascinating stuff that goes on in our brains that most people aren't aware of.
Mhm.
And,
Yes.
you know, I learned this about public speaking a long time ago. If you're up in front of people in a big audience and you're speaking with conviction, with authority, and I'm sorry that this is probably sounds really a little bit ghoulish, and I don't mean for it. My father passed away about 23 years ago, and I had to do his eulogy, and I didn't like public speaking. And I remember going up there, and a couple minutes into it, I thought to myself, they're listening to every word I say. I can control their minds. You know? and I start, you know, comparing that to art, and it's like, well, you know, what am I doing with design? I'm controlling the way people look at a painting,
Right.
recognizing how humans' brains work. I can lead them through a painting and have them stop here and then pick up again here and then move back there. I can control that. There's another piece I would show you with a whole diagram and everything, but I can't do it now because I'm doing a demo at the plein air convention next month, and this is what it's that painting, so I can't do it right now. But the point is, we're basically controlling the way people experience our paintings. If we do it well enough, we're controlling every move, and they don't know it. And that's about good design, right?
Right.
So there's just so much to learn. I just feel like one of the things I love about painting is that the more I learn, the more I realize there's more to learn.
Yes.
Yeah.
So does anybody else have any other questions for our speaker?
I just have a comment that the painting behind you, the big water cloud, I've never seen anything like that. Even though it's light, it looks like it's so heavy. I mean, you can see that this water is descending. It's so heavy. That's
Yeah.
very cool. It's very cool the way that works.
Well, thank you. There are some paintings that you do that you realize it's going to have a limited audience, but the hope is that the people that like it will really, really like it. I did a painting of a dock, just this little brown weathered dock. Tide was out. This was down in Apalachicola, Florida, during the Forgotten Coast Invitational, and it's basically a mud flat with a dock and hardly any color, just a little glint of a reflection of the sky, right? That's the only color in it, it's a little bit of blue. And I really liked it, but I knew it was going to have a limited audience. There's a painter, a guy named Gene Costanza. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Gene or not, but he's a good friend of Scott Christensen's. And Gene was in this show, and he came walking up to my wall, and he's standing next to me, and he looks at the painting, and without looking at me, he says, "That's a heck of a painting, Rich. That's really nice." And I said, "Thank you, Gene." And then he said, "You realize nobody's going to buy that, right?" Well, that was 12 years ago. I still have it. And I knew nobody was going to buy it, but I felt like I needed to paint it. And that's, and every painting is a lesson anyway, so no harm, right?
Well, what I love about that painting is even though the water's going down and it's heavy, it's also going up. It's like a mushroom cloud going up. It's like going both directions. That's what's beautiful about it.
So thank you, Lynn. When I finally unleash this on the public, I can't wait to see the comments that I get. I'm sure they're going to be all over the map, right?
Well, that's great because you're inspiring people to talk about it and have emotion about it. And that's what you want.
Well, you know what? If you can get somebody's attention for more than 30 seconds, that's a win. You know, somebody mentioned Dan Pinkham earlier, and I used to go to the Masters of American West show all the time, and I'd look at Dan's paintings, and I'd say to myself, I don't like it. I don't like the paint application. I don't like his palette. I don't like anything about it. And then the next year I'd be there and I'd see another couple of his paintings, and I'd be thinking the same thing. And after about 5 years of this, I realized I keep standing here and looking at his paintings for like 15, 20 minutes at a time. So
maybe that's what he wanted.
I got invited to go paint in Palos Verdes with Steve Merritt and Dan Pinkham. And I met him and we were talking, and I finally said to him, I said, "You know, Dan, I got to tell you something now. I used to look at your paintings and I didn't like them. I wasn't very impressed." And I said, "It's a funny thing. The more I learn, the better you get." And I love his work now. You know, and it hasn't changed all that much. I just didn't understand what he was doing, and now I get it. And it's like, man, this guy's special, you know?
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, he was a good sport about it too. So that was appreciated.
Well, good. Well, it's 8 o'clock, right, Margie?
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for this presentation.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Thank you.
I'm going to say to Chris Dillians, who's taking care of our Zoom meeting tomorrow. I'd like to put this on new business that we consider having Rich do a paint out with our group.
Great.
Yay, awesome.
I'd love to do it.
Great.
The secret to me teaching other people to paint is that it's just a ploy to get more friends. And it works. I love painting with other artists, you know?
Oh, definitely.
That's great.
Thank you again, Rich. And I'd like to, I run a Facebook page that's called The Beauty of California by Facebook artists. And originally we started with 6 members, and within a month, because what we did is we talked about where we were going to paint and get together as a group. So there is that community that we are trying to establish here too. But it jumped from like 8 people, and a month later I'll say 3 months later, we had 80 members. And so
that's good.
I invite people to share their work there, because you can also find people close to you to paint with, which is always nice.
Yeah,
nice
absolutely.
Group.
Can I ask one favor of you folks?
Sure.
About a month and a half ago, I don't know who, but somebody hacked my Instagram account.
Okay.
And in an instant, I had 14,000 followers that disappeared.
Oh.
normally I wouldn't care about that, except
Right.
that it actually has a lot to do with what opportunities you get. When I did in February, I shot 2 instructional videos for Streamline Publishing that'll be released later this year. And the reason that I got the opportunity to do that, they liked my work. They by their own words, they knew I could teach. They knew I was comfortable in front of a camera, but they wanted to wait until I had a significant number of followers, and it makes sense. At a certain point, they said, okay, we can put $40,000 into these videos and we have a chance of making our money back, because I had 14,000 followers, right? I had to start all over. Instagram has been no help whatsoever. And I've got like 425 followers now. So it kind of makes a difference. And there's other way. I've lost money from other art events, plein air live and things like that, because I didn't have enough people following me now. So if you guys are on Instagram, and if you're so inclined, I would really appreciate it if you could hit follow, because I'm trying to build that number back.
How are you listed on Instagram? Is it your name or, you know?
Yeah, it's at Rich Gallego Fine Art.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the old one was Rich Gallego Art. This one's Rich Gallego Fine Art. So
Gotcha.
if you find it there, I'd really appreciate the follows. It
I
helps.
sure hope you can find somebody at Meta that can help you get that back, because that's a crying shame.
Yeah, thank you. I've written them countless emails and have yet to get a single response through their portal even, and they don't respond at all.
Wow.
On the flip side, they did send me a check for $2 the other day for something I did on Facebook. I don't even know what happened. So, you know.
Crazy. Oh yeah. All right. Well, we'll spread the word. I followed you right away when I got that, and we'll spread the word with that.
Great. Thank you, guys.
I'll put that
Got
on
it.
my
Done.
Facebook page too.
Thank you. I appreciate the help. I really do.
Okay, cool.
All
Okay,
right.
and thanks, guys.
Thank you
Thanks for letting me
again.
talk your ears
Thanks,
off.
Rich.
all
Thank
this.
you.
All right.
Thank
See you
you.
soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank you.